Built for a Soviet conflict that never happened, these machines finally met their true test in the sands of Kuwait. This is the complete lineup of every aircraft flown during the Gulf War. We start our list with fighters and interceptors. Chengdu J-7, China supplied Iraq with this MiG-21 derivative before the war. Coalition electronic warfare and superior training made it ineffective the moment Desert Storm began. Next, Dassault Mirage 2000. France deployed this delta-wing fighter during Operation Daguet, providing air defense and escort duties as coalition forces swept through southern Iraq. Then, Dassault Mirage F1, the Gulf War's most unusual story, involves this aircraft. Iraq flew it against the coalition, while French Mirage F1s flew alongside them simultaneously. F-14 Tomcat. Flying from carrier decks in the Persian Gulf, its long-range radar monitored Iraqi air activity throughout Desert Storm, while also serving as a strike bomber. F-15 Eagle, the dominant air superiority fighter of Desert Storm. It claimed 36 aerial kills against the Iraqi Air Force, without losing a single aircraft in air-to-air combat. Then, F-16 Fighting Falcon, the most numerous coalition fighter during Desert Storm, flying thousands of strike missions against Iraqi infrastructure, airfields, and ground forces across the theater. FA-18 Hornet. On the first night of Desert Storm, a Navy pilot shot down 2 MiGs and then continued to his target and delivered his bombs. That single sortie defined this aircraft. F-5 Tiger II. Saudi Arabia flew this lightweight fighter throughout Desert Storm in ground attack and close air support roles alongside the more advanced coalition aircraft. The next one, MiG-29. Iraq's most capable fighter in January 1991, it was overwhelmed by coalition electronic warfare and training within the first days of Desert Storm. Next, MiG-21. Still present in Iraqi service during Desert Storm, despite being a design from the 1950s. Coalition fighters dispatched every example they encountered. MiG-23. Iraq used this swing-wing interceptor to challenge the coalition air campaign. Everyone that took off during Desert Storm faced overwhelming disadvantage against modern opponents. Next, MiG-25, Iraq's fastest aircraft, scored the only confirmed Iraqi air-to-air kill of the entire Gulf War, shooting down a Navy aircraft during a high-speed intercept. Panavia Tornado ADV. The Royal Air Force and Saudi Arabia flew this long-range interceptor to maintain air superiority over the Gulf region throughout Desert Storm's air campaign. Now this is the Shenyang J-6, another product of Chinese arms sales to Iraq before the war. Obsolete by 1991, most were destroyed on the ground before Iraqi pilots could even attempt to fly them. Next on the list is attack aircraft and strike fighters, a 10 Thunderbolt II. The Gulf War made this aircraft's reputation permanent. It destroyed more Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles than any other platform during the 100-hour ground campaign. A 6 Intruder. Flying from carrier decks in the Persian Gulf, this all-weather bomber struck Iraqi targets through the night and in weather that grounded less capable aircraft. A 7 Corsair II. Desert Storm was its final combat deployment. This veteran attack aircraft flew its last war missions over Iraq before being retired from US Navy service. The next one, AC-130 Spectre. Special Operations Forces depended on this gunship throughout Desert Storm. It hunted Iraqi ground units at night, with sensors and cannons that darkness could not defeat. Aero L-39 Albatross. Iraqi forces pressed this Czechoslovak trainer into light attack and reconnaissance duties during the Gulf War. Coalition air superiority made every sortie extremely dangerous. AV-8B Harrier II. Marines flew this vertical takeoff jet from forward desert locations during Desert Storm, keeping it close enough to the front to respond within minutes to ground calls. Blackburn Buccaneer. Brought out of retirement for Desert Storm when the Royal Air Force needed an aircraft that could designate laser-guided bombs for the Tornado fleet. Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. Kuwait flew this veteran attack jet from Saudi bases after Iraq destroyed its home airfields. Kuwaiti pilots flew combat missions over their own occupied country. F-111 Aardvark. Flying from bases in Saudi Arabia, this long-range bomber used precision-guided weapons to destroy hardened Iraqi aircraft shelters and underground command facilities. F-117 Nighthawk. The opening night of Desert Storm announced the stealth era. This aircraft struck central Baghdad unopposed, while conventional aircraft required massive support packages to survive. F-15E Strike Eagle, hunting Iraqi Scud missile launchers across the western desert at night, became this aircraft's defining Gulf War mission, using sensors to find mobile targets before they could fire. Grumman OV-10 Bronco. Marine forward air controllers flew this propeller-driven aircraft low over Kuwait, marking targets and directing strikes during the ground campaign's advance. Panavia Tornado IDS. British and coalition Tornadoes flew the Gulf War's most dangerous early missions at low level to crater Iraqi runways, suffering the highest loss rate of any coalition type. Next, CP-Cat Jaguar. British and French Jaguars flew hundreds of strike missions during Desert Storm. The British aircraft were fitted with new systems specifically because of this conflict. Sukhoi Su-7, an outdated Soviet ground attack aircraft still in Iraqi inventory in 1991. Most were destroyed on the ground during the coalition's systematic campaign against Iraqi airfields. Sukhoi Su-22. Iraq flew this swing-wing ground attack aircraft during the Gulf War, but coalition air superiority made sustained operations impossible. Many pilots defected to Iran rather than fight. Sukhoi Su-24. Rather than face the coalition in combat, most Iraqi Su-24 crews flew to Iran during Desert Storm, where the aircraft were impounded and never returned. Sukhoi Su-25, Iraq's dedicated ground attack aircraft, was designed for exactly the kind of close support fighting Desert Storm produced. Coalition air superiority prevented it from operating effectively. Continuing with bombers, B-52 Stratofortress. Flying from Diego Garcia and other distant bases, this bomber dropped more ordnance during Desert Storm than any other single aircraft type in the coalition. Tupolev Tu-16. This Soviet bomber from the 1950s was still in Iraqi service during Desert Storm. Coalition airstrikes destroyed most on the ground before they could sortie. Tupolev Tu-22, Iraq's supersonic bomber, was one of the most complex aircraft in its inventory. Maintenance difficulties and coalition air power combined to keep it essentially out of the war. Next, Xi'an H-6. China provided Iraq with this bomber before the war, giving it a platform for long-range strikes. Coalition air supremacy made flying it operationally suicidal from day one. Continuing with reconnaissance and electronic warfare. Dassault Falcon 20. Modified for electronic warfare and calibration roles, this business jet performed specialized technical missions that supported the broader coalition electronic campaign over Iraq. EA-6B Prowler. Every major coalition strike package during Desert Storm included this aircraft. Its jamming systems suppressed Iraqi radar long enough for strike aircraft to reach and escape their targets. EC-130, this aircraft broadcast Arabic language programming into Iraq during Desert Storm, disrupting Iraqi communications while delivering psychological operations messages to ground forces. EF-111A Raven. Flying ahead of strike packages into Iraqi airspace, this electronic warfare aircraft suppressed air defense radars to create corridors through which bombers could attack safely. F-4 Phantom II. Converted into a dedicated radar hunter for Desert Storm, it fired anti-radiation missiles at Iraqi air defense sites, systematically dismantling the air defense network from the first night. Grumman OV-1 Mohawk. Army intelligence units flew this sensor-equipped turboprop along the Iraqi border before the ground war began, tracking armored unit movements to feed coalition planning. RC-135. This aircraft orbited the Gulf War theater continuously, intercepting Iraqi military communications and providing intelligence that shaped every major coalition strike plan. U-2. Dragon Lady. Flying above Iraqi radar and missiles at extreme altitude, it photographed Iraqi deployments with precision that helped coalition commanders understand exactly what they would face. Now let's look at Airborne Command, Control, and Maritime Patrol. E-2 Hawkeye. Operating from carriers in the Persian Gulf, this aircraft managed the complex air picture over the battle space and directed coalition fighters toward Iraqi aircraft attempting to intercept. E-3 Sentry. The air traffic manager of Desert Storm. It simultaneously tracked coalition and Iraqi aircraft across the entire theater and directed every significant air-to-air engagement of the war. E-8. Joint Stars. Still in development when Iraq invaded Kuwait, It was rushed to the Gulf and tracked the Iraqi Republican Guard's ground movements, giving commanders real-time battlefield intelligence. Then EP-3 Ares. This naval signals intelligence aircraft monitored Iraqi military communications throughout the Gulf War buildup and provided targeting intelligence that shaped the coalition's strike priorities. Hawker Siddeley Nimrod. The Royal Air Force deployed this maritime patrol aircraft to monitor Iraqi naval activity in the Gulf and coordinate British naval operations throughout Desert Storm. P-3 Orion. Patrolling the Persian Gulf throughout Desert Storm, this aircraft monitored Iraqi naval movements and helped coalition warships locate and destroy the Iraqi surface fleet. The next one, S-3 Viking, originally a submarine hunter, this carrier-based aircraft spent the Gulf War patrolling surface shipping lanes and conducting strike missions against Iraqi naval targets. Let's move on to transports and tankers. Antonov An-12, Iraq's primary heavy transport before the war. It moved equipment and supplies across the country during the Kuwait occupation build-up until coalition airstrikes grounded the fleet. Antonov An-26. Iraq used this Soviet tactical transport for interbase logistics before Desert Storm began. Coalition air attacks on Iraqi airfields effectively ended its ability to operate. C-2 Greyhound. This carrier delivery aircraft kept the Persian Gulf battle group supplied throughout Desert Storm, flying critical spare parts and personnel to ships that could not leave station. C-5 Galaxy. Operation Desert Shield's logistics depended entirely on this aircraft. It moved the heaviest equipment across the Atlantic and Pacific to build the coalition force in Saudi Arabia. C-9 Nightingale. This dedicated aeromedical evacuation aircraft moved coalition casualties from Gulf War field hospitals to definitive medical care facilities in Europe and the United States. C-12 Huron. Coalition commanders across Saudi Arabia relied on this light utility aircraft to move personnel and priority cargo between the dozens of bases spread across the theatre. Up next, C-130 Hercules, the tactical backbone of Desert Storm logistics. It supplied forward bases, airdrop supplies, and moved troops throughout the theatre, from the build-up through the ground campaign. C-141 Starlifter, Desert Shield. Moved 500,000 coalition troops to Saudi Arabia in months. This long-range transport made that unprecedented strategic deployment physically possible. Up next, Handley Page Victor. Converted from its original bomber role decades earlier, this aircraft refueled Royal Air Force Tornadoes during Desert Storm in what became its final operational deployment. Now this is the Ilyushin 76. Soviet-built and operating in large numbers for Iraq before the war, most of the Iraqi fleet fled to Iran or was destroyed by coalition strikes on Iraqi airfields. KC-10 Extender. Its combination of fuel and cargo capacity made it indispensable for Desert Storm's long-range strike missions, simultaneously refueling escort fighters and delivering supplies. Next, KC-135 Stratotanker. More than 300 flew during Desert Storm, conducting around 15,000 refueling sorties. Without it, the coalition's air campaign at this scale was simply not possible. Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, the Royal Air Force converted commercial examples into tankers specifically to meet the refueling demand Desert Storm placed on British air power throughout the campaign. Vickers VC-10, the Royal Air Force's primary tanker during Desert Storm, it kept British Tornadoes and other coalition aircraft airborne during the strikes that defined the air campaign. Finishing off with helicopters. Aerospatiale Gazelle. French and British forces used this scout helicopter throughout Desert Storm to locate Iraqi positions and guide ground forces during the 100-hour liberation of Kuwait. Aerospatiale Puma. Coalition forces across multiple nations used this medium transport helicopter to move troops and supplies during Desert Storm's ground campaign through southern Iraq. Aerospatiale Super Frelon. Iraq operated this French heavy helicopter for anti-ship missions in the Persian Gulf. Coalition naval and air forces neutralized the Iraqi naval threat it represented early in the war. AH-1 Cobra. Marine attack helicopter crews flew this against Iraqi armor during the ground campaign, providing close air support that helped Marines advance through Kuwait's defensive lines. The next one, AH-64 Apache. The Gulf War opened with this helicopter destroying Iraqi radar sites in the dark, clearing the corridor through which the coalition's first strike aircraft entered Iraqi airspace. Now this is the Boeing CH-47 Chinook. The famous left hook that flanked Iraqi forces during Desert Storm depended on this helicopter to move artillery, fuel, and ammunition forward faster than any ground vehicle could. Now this is the CH-46 Sea Knight. Marine amphibious operations in the Persian Gulf use this helicopter to move assault forces between ships and shore as part of the deception campaign that fixed Iraqi coastal forces. CH-53 Sea Stallion. The largest helicopter in the Marine Corps inventory during Desert Storm, it conducted combat search and rescue missions and moved heavy equipment throughout the ground campaign. Hughes MD-500 Defender. Coalition Special Operations and some partner nation forces used this compact helicopter for observation and light attack during Desert Storm's reconnaissance missions. MBB-BO-105. German-built and operated by several coalition partners, this anti-tank helicopter used its agile, rigid rotor to attack Iraqi armor during the ground campaign. Up next, MH-53 Pavlo. Special Operations Forces used this helicopter on the first night of Desert Storm to guide Army Apaches to the radar sites destroyed to open the air campaign. MIL-Me-8, Iraq's most numerous transport helicopter, was caught on the ground by coalition airstrikes in large numbers. Survivors were captured intact when Iraqi positions were overrun. Up next, MIL-Me-24. Iraq operated this Soviet gunship during Desert Storm, but coalition air supremacy prevented it from influencing the ground campaign. Many were destroyed on their own airfields. Then, OH-6 Cayuse. Special Operations Aviation Units flew this small helicopter on reconnaissance missions during Desert Storm, operating in ways that larger and more visible aircraft could not. OH-58 Kiowa. Army scout crews flew this helicopter to find Iraqi positions during Desert Storm, and then directed Apache attack helicopters onto targets too well hidden to locate from altitude. SH-2 Sea Sprite. Operating from smaller US Navy warships in the Persian Gulf, this helicopter protected the coalition fleet from Iraqi naval and missile threats throughout Desert Storm. SH-60 Seahawk. The primary naval helicopter of the US fleet during Desert Storm. It conducted anti-submarine patrols, surface surveillance, and search and rescue throughout the Persian Gulf. UH-1 Iroquois. Still flying with US and coalition forces during Desert Storm, decades after Vietnam, it moved commanders and performed medevac duties throughout the ground campaign. UH-60 Black Hawk. The primary US Army assault transport throughout Desert Storm. It moved the infantry and special operations forces that executed the flanking ground campaign across southern Iraq. Westland Lynx. Royal Navy crews used this helicopter to attack and destroy Iraqi patrol boats in the northern Persian Gulf, eliminating the Iraqi surface threat to coalition warships. Now this is the Westland Sea King. British forces used this helicopter for commando transport, search and rescue, and airborne early warning throughout Desert Storm's naval and ground operations.